We got new rules everywhere, and a lot of folks wanted to know what I thought about it. So here we are. We're finally at Sunday, and it's the first time I've spoken to you since college football passed the new rules, and there are 3 of them. But I think we already know what those are, and if you don't, I'll get to them in just a second. You see them on the screen now. In fact, let's go ahead and tell you what the new rules are. So, of course, the clock runs after a first down, except inside 2 minutes. Pretty much the NFL rule. Teams cannot call back-to-back timeouts. Also, penalties at the end of the first quarter and third quarter don't require an untimed down. The latter 2 are very nebulous. No one really cares. You won't really notice it. And the first one, there's a little bit more angst, a little bit more consternation around. But I'll get to the specifics in a second. I wanted to remind you, college football, in many cases, is run by the unsneakiest group of sneaky people that you will ever come across. Do you remember a few months ago when this report first came out? I think it was Ross Dellinger, friend of the program, at SI, and he came out and he said there are 3, no, there are 4 potential rule changes on the table. They knew they were going to get pushback on this, okay? College football, like I said, college football is run by the most unsneaky group of sneaky people in the world. They knew they were going to get some pushback on rule changes. And so what they did is they did one of 3 things you could do. If you know you're going to get pushback on something, what are your options? Well, you could either just not do that thing, or you could brace yourself, or you could do what college football's sneaky group did. They just go the Overton Window route. And what that means is they throw out something ridiculous, blend it in with the things they actually want to pass, and then they chop the ridiculousness off at the last minute, sounding like they appeased you. Here's what that looks like in real time. You put those 3 rules that we actually got passed in there. So no untimed down at the end of a first or third quarter. You got no consecutive timeouts. Clock runs after first downs. Yeah, those just got passed. But what was the 4th one? Remember? Back in February, what was the 4th one? You remember all the uproar about how it was going to fundamentally transform the game if we had running clock after incomplete passes? Anyone remember that? Anyone remember this very program where I told you why that was thrown into the batch? Anyone remember me talking about the Overton window, which is a concept normally reserved for political talk? But trust me, political types are the types that are in the back rooms making these sorts of decisions. They know how the Overton window works. Thankfully, we never have to talk about it on shows like this, but it is out there. And sure enough, as I told you they were going to do, they threw out the 4th ridiculous parameter, knowing full well they could come back to the table a few months later, passing the 3 they needed to pass, and say, hey, we listened. We heeded your feedback, and we got rid of that 4th rule. There, compromise. See how it works? They didn't compromise with you at all. So how do I feel about this? Apparently, according to my DMs, a lot of you wanted to know how I felt about this. Well, I'm not crazy about the rule changes. I'm not outraged by them. The rule changes in and of themselves are fairly innocuous. Yes, it does change the game a little bit to have the clock run after first downs, except inside 2 minutes. That does shave the game down. It shaves possessions down. It shaves total plays down. For the record, that's what it's intended to do, whether you and I like it or not. But it doesn't completely upend the sport as we know it. I'll grant you that. It's not the rule changes themselves that cause your blood to boil a little bit. It's not until you take your hand and you peek behind the curtain and you move from the what to the why that you start to feel a little angry. Because it really just harkens back to a lot of what rubs you and I the wrong way about this sport in general, and that is the wrong people have their hands on the wheel. So again, these rule changes in and of themselves, it's not cause to light your torch and grab your pitchfork and march on NCAA rules headquarters. That's not how I feel about this. Now, some of you were a little more upset about it, and if you feel that way, you feel that way. I just want to redirect your attention to what the core issue is, if you feel that this is an issue. The issue is that these changes have nothing to do with appeasing fans, and contrary to what they would look you in the eye and tell you, these changes have nothing to do with player safety either. Since they're not in the room to represent themselves, allow me to represent their argument for them. But Josh, yes, we are looking out for the safety of players. Are you? How are you looking out for the safety of players? Well, thank you for the question. We'll tell you. We're looking out for the safety of players because we are limiting the amount of total plays in a game. Therefore, hold on, let us finish. Therefore, limiting the total amount of exposure to potential violent collisions. Now, what do you think about that? And then I look back at them. I would probably ask if they were finished, courtesy. And if they said they were finished, I would say, you're the same people about to ask teams to potentially play 17 games to win a national title, right? You're the same folks who are about to expand the playoff and therefore ask teams to play more games, right? They wouldn't have an answer. If you haven't noticed, these people are rarely ever on the record. These people rarely ever have to actually answer for these decisions. But there's a third party in the room, okay? So far, I'm just debating heads up. This is an A-B conversation. And then C walks in the room. And you know Mr. C. Mr. C is the dude who didn't get enough attention growing up, and so he just talks to hear himself talk. And so Mr. C is the kind of person who walks in and says, well, maybe they're just ahead of the curve. Maybe college football, the powers that be, learned from baseball. Look at how much better the Major League Baseball product is now. Look at how that could ultimately revive viewership. And you do have agreement with me if you're saying baseball has been bettered as a viewing product by the pitch clock, the pitch count. You got me on that one. It's just that you don't have me on the argument because it's apples to bowling balls in terms of a comparison. Baseball, you could just put on a sheet of paper. You could pop the paper if you wanted to. You could put on a sheet of paper in 5 minutes how the flow of baseball had cost them viewership. No one's leaving college football because of the length of games. No, and if there is someone, Mr. C, for example, if Mr. C does pipe up and say, I hate these 4-hour games, first thing you need to do is ask him, how many 4-hour games are you really watching? The answer is not many at all. There are exceptions to the rule. Let me just go ahead and save you the time. You don't need to pull up the 4-hour, 11-minute OU Texas game or something like that. I know there are exceptions to the rule. The general rule of thumb is there's not that much overflow already, and if there is, it's not because the game time itself is that much more lengthy. It's because you added about 6-minute blocks of commercial break and ad break in there. We all know that. No one's stupid here. Everyone knows the games overflow because there's more ad structure in a game today, in a broadcast today, than there was 20 years ago. Certainly, it is not within the realm of believability that anyone is going to sacrifice a nickel in profit to better the game. So in turn, we have to pretend that we're moving for player safety in shortening these games. And all the while, everyone kind of knows what it's about. And if you don't know what it's about, to be very clear, 2 things are in play here. Number one, I don't know if this is going to come as a surprise to you, but money is at the heart of this decision in 2 different ways. One, no one wants to shave ad revenue off of their broadcast. Full disclosure, I work at a company at CBS in which I get to make a handsome living talking about this sport in large part because of those large media rights deals. So if it sounds hypocritical, it sounds hypocritical. That's the first thing. Not gonna sacrifice any ad revenue, but we have to shorten the games because we do have to fit into windows. And then there's the second part. And the second part has to do with something of a little bit more litigious nature. That's just fancy word for stuff that happens in a courtroom. There are constantly legal battles happening around the sport of college football. You rarely see them, but they're playing out all the time. Every single month, they're playing out. And it has to do with head trauma, and it has to do with lawsuits being filed against the NCAA, and sometimes it gets settled, sometimes it goes to court. They have to have enough ammunition to be able to step into that environment, not on a TV screen, but in a courtroom, and to be able to show tangible evidence that, look, we've made changes. That's why the targeting rule's not going away, no matter how much it aggravates you or I. And that's also why they need to do things like shaving 8 to 12 plays per game on average out of a football game, because they can use that to hopefully circumvent just a flood of outgoing revenue in the form of paying off lawsuits. So yeah, money is always at the forefront of these decisions. But I had like 5 people that I saw come at me over the weekend with the whole seemingly apples to apples, well, it worked for baseball comparison. Yeah, it worked for baseball. Baseball needed it to work. Baseball was dragging. Baseball was actively bleeding viewership because of the flow of their game. College football wasn't bleeding any viewership because of that. So it was a crisis that was manufactured almost wholesale. Like I said a few months ago, and like I'll reiterate, I do a national college football show for a living. We do this thing year-round. I make myself as accessible as any national figure out there, or at least I like to think I do. None of you guys ever ask me about this. None of you ever complain to me about the length of games. And if one of you do, you're drowned out 100 to 1 by people who say, don't touch it. Don't change a thing about this. We're fine with it. We wait and wait and wait. I've got a countdown on a piece of paper in front of me. We're outside of 130 days until the kickoff of week 1, and we're already counting down. You actually think I care if a game goes 9 minutes longer than it's formatted to go once they get here? Of course I don't. Of course you don't. And anybody who actually does make this a sticking point is a casual of the highest nature who is not in what we would call the core audience. You're not losing any kind of worthwhile chunk of viewership because your game was supposed to go off at 3:30 and it went off at 3:36. This is not MacGyver. This is Texas Tech versus Baylor. And sometimes these things happen. I'm sorry, but hey, as long as we're being told it's in the player's best interest, it makes me able to sleep at night.